Testing, 1, 2, 3.
We'll be starting shortly if everyone can please find their seats. Is that enough volume, Lawrence? I guess so. Everybody hear me in the back? Allison, can you hear me? Okay, good. We appreciate everyone coming out. We know that everyone would rather be outside having fun tonight.
Yeah.
Start on time. I don't know what's going on. You have some water right there to your right if you need it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for mentioning that. I'll take the top off.
Hello, my name is Eric Pauls, and I'm a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending today's presentation. The Dole Institute Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the work of the Dole Institute. We attend regular meetings, assist in events like this, and plan an SAB-sponsored program every semester. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests. If you're a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you enjoyed today's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. If you prefer to write us a note, there will be a notepad and pens on a table as you exit the building. Your attendance and feedback help shape our future programming. Before we begin today, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience question and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. And now, please welcome our Dole Institute Assistant Director, Barbara Ballard.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening and welcome to the 2013 Dole Lecture, Ike's Legacy. But before I do that, I have the pleasure of announcing the 2013 recipient of the Robert Hemingway Public Service Award. I think as many of you know, the Dole Institute of Politics established the Robert Hemingway Public Service Award in May of 2009 in honor of the 16th Chancellor of the University of Kansas upon his retirement. The $1,000 award is given annually to a junior student who has demonstrated a commitment to making a difference for KU students and furthering the ideas of service on campus and within the community. The overriding criteria for this award is commitment to public service with demonstrated leadership. I would like to thank Ann Eversole for helping us interview, and Ann Eversole is a retired staff member here at the University of Kansas and has lots of experience with making sure the students get awards. We have 4 finalists this evening, and we had an outstanding pool to choose from, and we chose 4 finalists. Our 4 finalists this evening, and I will ask them to stand and face you, would be Allison Cohn, and her major is journalism, news and information, and political science. Thomas Plummer, his major is economics and business. Hannah Sitz, strategic communications, journalism, and psychology, and she was recently named a Truman Award winner. Mm-hmm. And Caitlin Dornbos in journalism. I would like to say in our interviewing process, when I say we had outstanding, we had 4 outstanding finalists. So we decided we would give special recognition to 3 of them, and they each will receive a $500 award. And that would be Thomas Plummer, Hannah Sitz, and Caitlin Dornbos. Please give them a round of applause. This evening's recipient of the Robert Hemingway Public Service Award is Allison Cohn. I would like to just tell you a little bit about Allison. Vice President Recruitment for Alpha Chi Omega, College of Liberal Arts and Sciences Senator and Student Senate, Readership Advisory Board Chair, KU United Campaign Manager from 2011 to 2012, University Daily Kansan Weekend Editor for fall of 2011 semester, University Daily Kansan News Editor for spring of 2013, and she will be the University Daily Kansan Editor-in-Chief for the summer of 2013 semester. So that's our editor this summer. In addition to that, she's received awards, the Emily Taylor Center for Women and Gender Equity Breast Cancer Award, the Kansas City Star Press Club, a 4-year renewable scholarship, and 4 other scholarships as well. Other activities, she's been with the Big Event, which we also have one of our finalists do a lot of work on, the Big Event Volunteer, Jubilee Cafe Volunteer as well. We asked each of them to write a brief essay of why public service is important to you and what impact does public service have on the campus and the broader community. I decided to just read one paragraph from Allison's because we all thought it told us a unique message. As a student journalist, there is no greater public service that I can perform than to educate and inform my peers. I believe that reliable and trustworthy journalism, coupled with sound reporting and ethical fitness, sit at the foundation of a democratic society. This act of public service is important because it promotes free thinking and social awareness. The right of an education is a necessary civil liberty in our country, and I believe it is one of the most important public services that contributes to the growth and well-being of society. Please recognize Allison Cole as the 2013 recipient of the Robert Dole Public Service Award. Thank you very much. I would like to, at this time, just acknowledge, since they won't be able to, that they have, some of them have their parents with them. And I will start with Allison's parents, Steve and Rochelle Cohn. Would you stand, please? And Caitlin has her mom with her. And this is Shannon Stukert. So thank you so very much. At this point, I will just go on with our program, but we're always delighted to recognize Chancellor Hemingway. He's unable to be with us this evening. I think many of you know that he is in ill health. So we want to recognize him, and again, thank him very much for the contributions he made to the University of Kansas. Our program this evening, as you know, will be Ike's Legacy. I will ask you to also look on the back of your program and know that we have one more program left, and Bill Lacey keeps adding programs. So Wednesday, May 8th at 3 p.m., we have a film screening of Nwang Gambu, Heart of a Tiger, and producer and narrator Bev Chapman. So 50 years after the first U.S. ascent of Mount Everest. And it'll be a documentary, and I'm sure you will enjoy this. We're excited for our Dole Lecture this evening with Brigadier General Carl Reddel, and he began his work with the Eisenhower Memorial Commission in 2001, while he was a public service fellow in the Center for Public Service at the Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania. During 1999 and 2000, he was president and CEO of the Eisenhower World Affairs Institute in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining the Institute, he was professor and head of the Department of History at the United States Air Force Academy. Once the commission chose a memorial site in 2005, General Reddel oversaw securing congressional approval in 2006 for Area 1 location and negotiated the appointment of an executive architect to manage the pre-design process. General Reddel also is a specialist in Russian studies. He directed a department of 35 faculty members at the United States Air Force Academy, which offers one of the largest and most diverse undergraduate programs in global and military history in the United States. He has studied at the Institute for the Study of the USSR and undertaken research at the U.S. Army Russian Institute in Moscow State University. He was educated at Drake University, the Maxwell School of Syracuse University, and the Russian and East European Institute of Indiana University. I will turn this program over to Bill Lacey, the director of the Dole Institute of Politics, and I think you're in for a special treat this evening. We all know that President Eisenhower did a lot for our country. Came from Abilene, Kansas, and people often refer to him as father of the interstate. Can you imagine how would we get around without the interstate? Not only was he a world-renowned general, but he's from the state of Kansas. And often people don't think we produce these fantastic people, but we do. And we do it on many occasions. So I hope this evening you will learn more about Ike, especially things you did not know. And I will ask you for a round of applause for our guests this evening, Brigadier General Reddel and Bill Lacey.
Thank you. Thank you. Carl, welcome to the Dole Institute. We're delighted to have you here.
With such a generous, open-hearted, and warm introduction, I can't be anything but pleased. Thank
Oh,
you.
great. Tell us when and why you first got interested in Ike.
Oh, in the simplest sense, it happened because of Russia. In a way that I did not plan, I became a Russian specialist and a military officer. How else do I explain that except for the Cold War? Because I was born in western Nebraska, my grandmother's house with my first brother and sister. How did I end up wearing a uniform for much of my adult life and becoming a Russian specialist? It was very simply put because of the Cold War. And long story short, as we are approaching the end of the Cold War, because of all the above, I am leading a team of young Americans into Russia to destroy nuclear-capable missiles, working together with Strategic Rocket Forces officers of the Soviet Union. I thought if these two enemies, the Cold War is still on, these two enemies can beat swords into plowshares, wait till the Cold War is over. These two former enemies might show the world some progressive dust. Didn't happen. I was frustrated with the process, but I was an active duty military officer. My obligations were very clear. But I'm also a trained historian, and I decided it might be time to look at the past. So if my war, World War III, the Cold War, wasn't ending the way I thought it might, how did they end World War II? So I went back and took a look and discovered General Marshall, General Eisenhower, and others. And I realized perhaps I was a pygmy in a land of former giants. Simply put, that's why I'm here, doing what I'm doing now.
Well, as a general in the Air Force, what about General Eisenhower's generalship impressed you most?
My understanding of Eisenhower as a military officer was an incremental, gradual thing. It was not a single insight. And although I was a military professional, our services are quite different in the way in which they do many things, all committed to the security of this great country, but working in different land, sea, and air environments and different traditions within their services. I'm saying that in part because we're talking about an Army officer, and I do not pretend to know the Army culture and all of the facets of what it is about leadership. But on the other hand, I came finally to understand that Eisenhower was a very embedded, fundamental part of the transition of my profession into its current modern state of competence. And I discovered that as I learned to know Eisenhower, that he had a great deal to do with the creation of my own service, the United States Air Force, and of an institution that I spent much time with, the United States Air Force Academy. He had come to be part of the transition of our military services into the modern form, shape, and competence which they represent today. That took time. It says more about my ignorance and lack of awareness than it does about these other things, but I came to know what I've just told you is very true. Eisenhower was fundamental to these larger issues in ways that I didn't appreciate till much later in life.
What do you think is more impressive, his record as a general in World War II or as a president?
In a cliche sense, that's a million-dollar question for many people. From my viewpoint, it's neither one nor the other. His record as a general is powerful, and as is his record as president. But what is most amazing to me is to how these two worlds came together in a single lifetime of citizenship and public service. So as general, he was part of the evolution of our military and never lost his focus on the security of the country. From the beginning of his wearing a uniform at West Point till the end of his life, the security of this country came first, above and beyond everything else. And he pursued that security first as a general and then as president, and it's a single story. And the great book to tell this has yet to be written. That single story is what makes this general, this president, truly exceptional. That is a single, unitary fabric, a holistic dimension to what this man was about. And his strategic sense, his executive sense, his leadership capabilities, all of them must be viewed through this combined set of lenses, if you will. To separate them is artificial, and it's a huge mistake.
Okay, when we talked a few weeks ago, and you agreed to come and speak to everybody tonight, you said that one of the really interesting aspects of being the executive director of the commission is that you have access and get to see all this interesting new research that's being done on Ike. Talk a little bit about some of the new historians and some of the projects that are in the work on his legacy.
The Eisenhower legacy continues to be revealed to both specialists and to the general public in multiple ways. And in the role of the executive director of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, we are able to knock on doors that we wouldn't be able to knock on otherwise. For example, I have the senior editor of the Eisenhower Papers, Professor Louis Columbus from Johns Hopkins University, call in our office at least once a month. He spent over 25 years producing the 21 volumes of the Dwight David Eisenhower Papers. We cite that example as one indication of the depth and the breadth of the legacy as it's now being revealed. Those volumes were only completed in the year 2001. It typically takes 4 or 5 years from the result of that type of scholarship to be translated into a format that the general public can enjoy. So what's happened, let's say beginning in 1990, this process has been ongoing. It's gone through several cycles and phases. It's now in many ways in another and new phase of reappreciation of General and President Eisenhower. So without citing a particular book, the book that I have just finished reading is on Eisenhower's Sputnik moment. It's a reanalysis of how he dealt with Sputnik, our achievements in space, the substance of his contributions, and what it meant for the long-term history and future of the United States. That's done at a level of scholarship which hasn't been done before, although everybody thinks they know Eisenhower, or many people think they know Eisenhower and Sputnik. But I'd suggest Yannick Mieczkowski's book, published by Cornell University Press, just out, is an exciting new book of the reality of that story. And I could cite others. We track this. It's our intelligence operation, if you will. The latest leading insights on Eisenhower, and if I make grand statements about Eisenhower tonight, they're based on that kind of scholarship.
Okay. Let me ask a really tough question about your personal opinion of Eisenhower's legacy. I mean, what stands out? If you were going to give us 2 or 3 key points tonight, what would really stand out in your mind?
I'm affected by my experience as a serving officer and the long-term opposition we had to a continental power that was hostile to us and in some ways intent on destroying us. That was, of course, the Eurasian continent as ruled by its Soviet leadership for much of the 20th century. When I look at Eisenhower, I view him through that lens. And these are going to be big generalizations, but we have a limited period of time. Let me suggest to you a viewpoint on this. At the beginning of the 20th century, there are 2 continentally based powers, one in Eurasia, one in the North American continent. They are both experiments in the realization of human destiny. One ends up being terribly flawed and fails. The other is still alive today. We are gifted as Americans to walk on that stage of one of the great historical experiments. In the simplest sense, one of the best pieces of evidence we have that this American experiment works is Dwight David Eisenhower. He lived citizenship to its fullest. He never gave up on his concern for the security of his country, and at the same time, he had all of the passion and faith in his soul that liberty, democratic values, and processes should be given to as many people as possible. To me, that is a contribution which is huge and enormous. One time, I was on the telephone with General Andrew Goodpaster. For military officers, that's a revered name in the 20th century. He was also staff confidant secretary to General Eisenhower. I had the privilege of sharing office space with him when I first came to Washington with the Eisenhower World Affairs Institute. And I realized through time he was tutoring me on Eisenhower in his own beautiful, understated, informal way. When I began work with the commission, one day I called him and he said, "Carl, how's the memorial going?" I told him. And then he said, "Well, Carl, you know what the question really is? Where is Ike when we need him?" Yes, sir. There was never a man in American history more committed to the security of this country and developing as much liberty as possible for us. Eisenhower worked tremendously hard on both of those. Was there ever a time when we needed to balance liberty and security? I think Eisenhower has relevance for us today. And I know your question was more complex than that, but if I were to come to the very core of what I understand about this great man now, this great citizen, I should say, that's it.
Okay, very good. I'm going to shift gears. I want to talk about the Memorial Commission, but I want to ask the audience, before you heard about tonight's program, how many of you had heard of the Eisenhower Memorial Commission? Raise your hand. So 50%, 45%, something like that. So that's pretty good. What is the Eisenhower Memorial Commission, General? What do you do?
The Eisenhower Memorial Commission is a creation of the United States Congress. The commission is made up of 4 senators, 4 members of the House, 4 presidential appointees. The creation of the Memorial Commission reflects in part what I just told you about the evolution of the view and reappreciation of Eisenhower. The fact that this commission was created is, if you will, an expression of the United States people, of its leaders as represented in Congress, and 2 World War II veterans, a senior Republican, Senator Ted Stevens from Alaska and Senator Daniel Inouye from Hawaii, both together in a bipartisan way said it is time for us to reappreciate and share Eisenhower. So they introduced the legislation which led to the creation of the commission. So in a simple sense, my colleagues and I, we have a small staff, about 8, 9 people. We work for the 4 senators, 4 members of the House, 4 presidential appointees, to help them make their best decision about how best to share Eisenhower's achievements and legacy with the American people. The commission then works under the guidance of the existing laws and regulations, which have become more and more complex because of the competition in part for space on the mall in Washington, D.C. in itself. So for good reason, this has become a very deliberate kind of process so that time is not wasted, money is not wasted, space is not wasted, and we work that process to complete this memorial at the direction of the Congress.
Mm-hmm. Why do you believe that an Eisenhower Memorial is so necessary?
I believe it's necessary in part because of this great experiment I was describing to you earlier. In order for this great experiment to continue well, we have to be as mindful as possible of the great and poor leadership we've had at different times in our history. We need to know enough of our history in order to make this truly work. One day, I was in Senator Inouye's office with my chairman, and we were there. Senator Inouye was, until his recent passing, our vice chairman. And when my chairman, Rocco Siciliano from Salt Lake City, Utah, and I sat down with Senator Inouye, he began to talk about the War of 1812. And he began to talk about its significance in American history. And as he talked about this, my chairman looked at me. This is not Senator Inouye's normal mode. What's happening? And I shook my head. I don't know what's happening. But the senator went on to talk about how important this was and how few young Americans appreciated its significance. And then he turned to my chairman and said, and Rocco, if we don't do something about Ike, they won't know about him either. Here I am seated with this Japanese American from Hawaii, Congressional Medal of Honor winner, lacking one arm, with this Italian American from Salt Lake City, Utah, member of the 10th Mountain Division, discussing how to memorialize this German American from the plains of Kansas. I thought, what an American story. And that's what the burden of these men, World War II generation, were about, because they believe it is essential for this experiment, if it is to continue, that we do what you're doing at this Dole Institute, to share these great models and exemplars and examples of the past that should both inspire us and enable us to continue the experiment.
Okay. Talk to us a little bit and kind of walk us through, once you took over as executive director, what is the process by which the location was established, the designer was chosen? Kind of walk us through that process, and then we'll actually give you a few moments to talk about the current design.
Okay. Very interestingly, you just raised the three major questions which I learned were part of this process. Having retired from the Air Force a little bit early in order to engage with Eisenhower, I would occasionally encounter a former Air Force friend, let's say, and they'd say, oh, I understand you've retired. Yes, I have. What are you doing? I'm working on this memorial to Ike. And I would get one of three questions in different order. Where are you going to put the memorial? What's the memorial going to be? Is it going to be a statue to Ike? And when are you going to do it? And you have to answer those three questions. So in the simplest sense, a memorial of the magnitude we're talking about, a national presidential memorial. In other words, there are statues to presidents and so forth, different memorializations which are not truly national. There are 6 national presidential memorials. This will be number 7 and the first of the 21st century. So to complete this process, you need first of all to identify a site, and that has its own specific legal requirements. You have to come before different boards and bodies, and if it's within what is defined as Area 1, then you need also the approval of the House and the Senate in order to be in Area 1. So that means once you've selected the site, then you must have the congressional approval. We selected our site finally after looking at 26 in the year 2005. We received the approval of the House and the Senate, and signed by President Bush in 2006. Once you have the site, then the next challenge is how do you select the designer? How do you come up with what the design should be? And then that brings you to a different phase, a different focus, a different mission. And we decided, because of our small size, the limited resources, we needed a tested and tried process. And for that, we went to GSA, General Services Administration, and used their Design Excellence Program because it had been used so successfully. So we used that to winnow out from 44 applicants, a final set of 7, reduced the 7 to 4, and then made a final choice. And the answering where the memorial will be and what the memorial will be then gives you the opportunity to think about how and when you can get it built. And that's the sequence of activities we've been in, and each of them have their own attendant requirements.
And how did you choose the designer?
The designer was chosen through this Design Excellence Program. Okay. This site, as I will have an opportunity to explain, is an extremely complex site. And it's a very difficult kind of challenge from an architectural viewpoint. the site was chosen because of its particular pertinence to the Eisenhower legacy. And then the complexity of the site was not the reason to choose it or not choose it, but it was chosen because of how it related to the legacy itself. So the commission decided that they wanted, as a designer of the memorial, competence at the highest possible level they could get. So they decided to have firms that would submit portfolios. So 44 architectural firms submitted portfolios to this design excellence program. And then within that was a board of prestigious architects, not commission members, but board of prestigious architects that participated. We had some observer representation, and David Eisenhower, the President grandson, sat on this as well. But we were not the larger decision makers. And these panels then recommended to the commission what they felt was the best of the proposals from an architectural viewpoint.
Okay. Why don't you show us the current design and walk us through it a little bit. I think we're going to have a slide up on the screen here that will appear momentarily.
The location of the memorial is this Eisenhower Square. This is a 4-acre rectangle at the base of the Capitol. This is the Capitol of the United States. This is Maryland Avenue. Maryland Avenue runs through the site as it now stands. Over here is the National Mall. So we're not on the mall. We're fond of saying that we're building an icon to Ike across the street. This is Independence Avenue, across the street from the National Mall. It's a very large space of what you might consider prestigious real estate at the base of the United States Capitol. This slide, I think, gives you a sense of the complexity of this urban site. There are 8 lanes of traffic on this street. There are 4 lanes of traffic over here. There are 4 lanes of traffic over here. There are irregular building lines and uneven, disharmonious, asymmetrical dimensions to what this is about. What the designer of the memorial has done is created an urban green space and defined it with columns that you see here, along here, and columns that are holding stainless steel tapestries which are evocative of the Kansas landscape and of the heartland. The trees in the green that you see here are Kansas species trees which are harmoniously put into this spot to be in harmony with the images you see on the tapestries. And then in the center of this area is the memorial itself. When the final 7 architectural firms came to walk this site, there was one thing that they agreed on. This is a tough site. How do you bring it to realize this complex legacy? And it was out of that that this evolved. I'd like to point out to you why the site was, and I'll do this very briefly, chosen. Here you have FAA, Eisenhower, 1958. Here you have the National Air and Space Museum, recall NASA, 1958. Here you have the Voice of America Studios, moved down there by Eisenhower, 1954. Who is it that creates the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare? Eisenhower. Here you have the Department of Education, Health and Human Services here. A great location for Eisenhower at the base of the Capitol of the United States. And of all American presidents, Eisenhower was notable for his respect for the Congress of the United States and for the people of the United States. And I'm really quoting to you Ernest May from Harvard when I say that. So if you are, let's say, on the top of the National Air and Space Museum, this is what you would see, this green urban park within which sits here the memorial to President Eisenhower. So if you were to go to the end of the memorial site, the farthest distance away from the Capitol, and you were to look to the Capitol dome, here is what you would see. a beautiful alley of trees, Kansas species trees, framing Maryland Avenue and framing then the capital of the United States. Here you would see this row of columns which have then, as part of their dimensions, the stainless steel tapestry which is behind these green trees. Here you see another column over here. The memorial itself has evolved through time. You have both the general and the president. These are large stone blocks, approximately 26 feet high, and you have heroic size bronze statues of the general, and this is evocative of the famous photograph on Eisenhower on the 5th of June, 1944, on the eve of D-Day. Over here you have the American president. The imagery here is definite. I believe there's no question that the background now will be the Normandy beaches in bas-relief with the bronze statues in front. Over here, the president to similarly be in front with the appropriate bas-relief in the back, not fully decided. Now, as part of what the designer believes is the Eisenhower story being the American story, he believes, as he must by law, have the general and the president together because it's really a single monument. It is not two monuments. And his sense of the unity of this is to have a life-sized young Eisenhower having within his cone of vision the general and the president he will become. And at the present time, he is having the young Eisenhower on this wall, which is in front of the Department of Education and stretches this distance here. The general, the president, and the young Eisenhower having within his cone of vision the general and president he will become. Remarkable in this is the designer's belief in the heartland. You will see in the background here then images which are artistically presented in a tapestry, which is transparent. We don't have time to demonstrate that to you tonight. I heard the designer speak about this design personally in Disney Hall just a year ago. And at that time, he said something I'd never heard him say before, but I know he deeply believes it. He said, for the first time, we are going to bring Middle America to the capital of the United States. Afterwards, I said, Mr. Gary, Frank, I've never heard you say that before. I know he believes it intensely. He believes that the landscape of the heartland is a metaphor for America itself and deeply a part of what Eisenhower was about. Thanks for giving me a chance to explain that design.
Definitely wanted everybody to see that. Now, there's been some controversy with the design, General. Some of the family have objected to it. There's been some objections in Congress. Kind of update us on where all of that is and what the Commission's doing about that.
The Commission has been in existence a while. It was, the legislation dates from 1999. It was fully appointed in 2001. And that seems like a long time, but one must put it in the context of other memorials. The FDR Memorial took 44 years to complete. The World War II Memorial, from the day a constituent asked Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, why isn't there a World War II Memorial, from that point till it was finished was 17 years. We've been in existence in a working sense since 2001, so decade plus. We're very conscious of that period of time. Now, we actually have made really pretty good progress by those other standards. And our progress continued to be, I think, effective and efficient and moving fairly rapidly in a comparative sense up until December 2011. And it was in December 2011 that David Eisenhower, the President's grandson, resigned from the Commission. With his resignation, the family asked for to have additional input on the process. And then there were some select members of Congress that did. The Commission then decided to delay and pause, which it has done. And it paused for a number of months. In the meantime, work on different elements of the design activities continued, but the Commission did pause to receive these other inputs. In that intervening period of time, Then Frank Gehry met with Susan and Ann Eisenhower in Washington, D.C. I happened to attend that particular meeting. David was coming, but they said he was unable to join us at the last minute. That meeting and a series of other meetings then took place. That meeting was followed then by a meeting of the Commission, its executive committee, with Susan and Ann. And at that time, Senator Roberts asked and the Commission supported his working directly with the family, which he did for an extended period of time. That process went on and led to a meeting with the Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar, which was subsequently followed by another meeting with President Pro Tem of the Senate, Senator Inouye, when he was alive and in that role. That cycle of meetings led to a number of inputs, and Frank Gehry then made some changes to the design. One of the inputs from the family and from some select members of Congress was that the designer was not being bold enough about Eisenhower's greatness, that the bas-relief images were too subtle, too modest in their appreciation of the general and the president. So what you just saw here as statues didn't exist in that earlier design. They were bas-relief images. So what the designer did is he took the general out of the wall, if you will, the bas-relief, and made the general a heroic bronze 9-foot-tall statue. Did the same with the president, took him out of the bas-relief and performed the same act. So from the Commission's viewpoint, and by the way, the Commission liked those changes. They thought they were good and they're a positive result of this process. They were very emphatic about that. So those changes were made. However, another dimension that was criticized by different parties. There are some people that believe that the stainless steel tapestry is not a good idea, but it is not just the idea of a tapestry, it's also the idea of the landscape, that the landscape somehow diminishes the status of the president and the general. The designer does not believe that. You heard me just present his view that he believes the landscape is a powerful metaphor for what Eisenhower really represented. So some of the critics of the process, including the family, have said that they would prefer that there not be a tapestry. They're fairly definite about that, but the designer has said that he believes that tapestry is fundamental and believes he's committed to the landscape. The Commission has wanted and continues to remain open to the process, but they've said to us as a staff, you need to continue the process that we started 10 years ago, stay on this continuing track. And just this week in the Topeka newspaper, Senator Roberts presented his views of the status of that discussion. So if any of your audience is interested, I'd suggest they take a look at his comments, which came out this week while I'm here, actually. And it's his view of where that process stands also.
Okay, very good. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll open it up to everyone's questions and answers. But General, obviously you've been involved in this for some time. Play a little Monday morning quarterback for us. If you could go back and change the way you did anything, the Commission did anything, is there anything that you would try to change or modify as part of the process?
Well, the Commission's original effort was intended to be as inclusive as possible, but anytime you have dissonance and controversy, I think that's a degree of evidence that somehow you could have done, better with that process. If I had the opportunity somehow to have an input which would have diminished that dimension, that would have been, I think, in retrospect for me, a useful act to take. I'm not quite sure what that would be. Having the presence of the President's grandson and members of the Eisenhower family at 13 of our 16 Commission meetings, we felt was a sincere effort in that direction. But the fact that we have existing challenge and controversy suggests that there were other things that we could have done perhaps more. I think the thing I wish I could have done would have been to have this great biography of Eisenhower written that I'm talking about. That would have answered all of these questions. People would have said, of course we need Eisenhower. and that would be done. So I'm still working on that piece of it to get someone to do this great book on Eisenhower, because it truly is an extraordinary story. And the big successful portrait, and this may be a result of meetings like this. Someone out there is going to do this, and then people will say, why haven't they done this sooner? Why hasn't it already been done? I will never forget the first time our chairman and I called on the secretary of the Commission of Fine Arts. We were making courtesy calls. The commission had just been set up. And we called on Charlie Atherton at the Commission of Fine Arts, and he had just gone through the battles of completing the World War II memorial. We sat down with this very experienced man who had worked in memorialization for years. We told him what we were about, and he hadn't said a word during our whole conversation. He leaned across the table in that deep, booming bass voice. He said, when we told him what we wanted to do, he said, "It's about time." And it's about time we do this.
Okay, very good. Let's open it up to your questions for the General. Do we have any questions tonight? Please raise your hand. We'll have one of our students bring by a microphone. Guess we answered all the questions, Carl.
Great.
Okay, here we go.
Hello, Carl. It's only been about 40 years
Oh, my
since we've
goodness.
seen each other.
This is a gentleman I met in Moscow.
Yes. I had the pleasure of rubbing shoulders with, he wasn't a general then, but back in 1975, we were both in Moscow for a few months. And we're both without our wives, so we commiserated about that for a couple of months. Since you are in the Russian field, Carl, I wonder if you might comment about Eisenhower and the Russians in a general sense.
Well, you put your finger on, Professor Alexander is one of the most notable historians in Russian history, and we're forever indebted to him for his insights, among others, on Catherine the Great. I came to Eisenhower in part because of Russia, an important part of why I'm engaged with Eisenhower, informed and affected by the Cold War, as we all were very aware when we were in Moscow together. Eisenhower understood the contributions of the Russian people to victory in World War II. He understood well that it was the Russian army that had bled the German army to death on the Eastern Front. He transcended a narrow definition of himself and was open to the peoples of the world in an extraordinary sense, and that included the Russian people. He had come to the conclusion as a military officer that nuclear war was unwinnable, and he was determined somehow to avoid war between our nations. It's immensely unfortunate that the advice he was given was in many ways flawed concerning some of the reconnaissance activities he was undertaking, because he could have, perhaps, and he certainly had the capability to affect the relationship between our countries at a time when it was deeply threatening to the possibilities of our continuing existence. He understood all of the dimensions of what I'm just describing, and at the same time believed in peace, sustaining human life, and expanding liberty as much as he could. He carried that banner in a credible way as a soldier that the Russian people understood and accept and even respect in many ways today. On the 25th of April, this past month, I joined American veterans and Russian veterans at Arlington Cemetery to celebrate the anniversary of their meeting in 1945. Powerful moment in our national cemetery. Eisenhower would have respected that immensely. And for us as a nation to finally resolve the outstanding issues of the Cold War would be something that Eisenhower would admire and respect. he transcended the narrower definition of ourselves. And I believe the Russian people understood that in a particular way.
Okay. Another question? Yes, you do. You need a microphone so we can get this on tape. So.
Okay. Oh, okay. I understand. Oh, stand up. Okay, so I wasn't sure if you already mentioned this, but how were you able to secure funding for this extremely large project?
Good question.
Okay. The funding for national presidential memorials has a history, as you might imagine. So one of the things that we did when we looked after what we were doing was to examine the history of the funding of national presidential memorials. So as you may recall earlier, I said there were 6. And of the 6 national presidential memorials, the Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, the 2 Roosevelts, and the Kennedy Center, 3 of those 6 are 100% federally funded. The most recent, the FDR Memorial, is 89% federally funded. When the commission began its work, they thought they would complete the memorial in a shorter period of time, and they intended to do it with complete federal funding. Through time, and as the process lengthened, they re-examined that, and they decided that they wanted to go ahead with 80% federal funding and 20% to be raised in the private sector. And that's the basic model against which it is working today.
Okay.
Carl, you told us over dinner that Ike was an honorary Rotarian from Abilene.
Yes.
Would you care to talk a little bit about the people-to-people stuff that you've been involved in, particularly with the end of the Cold War and Rotary, and the outreach to Siberia and those areas?
Okay. I told you a little bit, thank you, Professor Kipp. I told you a little bit earlier that I had become attracted to Eisenhower in part because of my experience with the Russians as we were approaching the end of the Cold War. Subsequent to that, and as part of that, I found, to my surprise, that even though I felt my country, my government, was not doing some of the things it might usefully do, which is another subject, at the end of the Cold War, that there were Americans and Canadians that were reaching out to Siberia, and this began before the end of the Cold War. And to my great surprise, they were doing community building in Siberia. It was primarily a Rotary activity. I knew very little about that, but as it turned out, they did not have Russian specialists particularly available to advise them. So I was asked, would I assist with that? And I thought, well, I was curious and I was interested, and for the price of a bus ticket, a train ticket, or a tank of gas, and I'd take a day's leave, I began that process. And I was absolutely and remain very fascinated by it. Because what it meant was that Rotarians began to work with Russians to address some of their major community issues and problems. And it became an exercise in a form of practical relationships in democracy that I, of course, now know that Eisenhower was a great promoter of. Eisenhower, on one occasion, is quoted by presidents of Rotary International as saying, the greatest force for peace in the world after the United Nations is Rotary International. And his hometown of Abilene made him an honorary Rotarian in 1942. And just recently we discovered a letter that he wrote to Mamie about that. And in that letter to Mamie, he says, dear sweetheart, I've just received news from Abilene that they've elected me an honorary member. He said, Abilene may be only 4,000 people, but I am, may I say it, damn glad that they've asked me, because Abilene is my town. Then he went on to say, maybe this is the case of the boy from a small town becoming a success in a big town, but I'm happy with it. In any case, it was a very genuine thing from his viewpoint. And then he came to realize, as many of you know, that the dimension of reaching out to the people of another country was a very powerful force in its own right. So people to people, the Sister Cities program, support of Rotary International, all of these things were individual activities by citizens, which he deeply and directly respected and promoted as best he could. It's a great piece and part of our American history, and I was very happy to learn tonight that maybe there's a doctoral dissertation being done on the people-to-people part of this, because there are lessons there for us today and things that we could be active again in better ways. So thanks for giving me a chance to get on the soapbox a little bit about that.
Yeah, I have to insert here that Carl and my dad know each other very, very well from Rotary, and I was under strict orders from my father to welcome Carl tonight and say, "Dad said to tell you hello." So I have done that. So
Bill's father was the president of Rotary International. Rotary International has, is the world's largest international service club. It has roughly 1,200,000 members in 140 different countries and 39,000 different clubs. It does more for international education in the United States than the Fulbright program, the Ford Foundation programs, and all those others put together. I didn't know that. They quietly do that. That's what they're about, in part. I didn't even begin to tell you what they've done to wipe out polio in the world, which Bill's father has played a huge and important role in.
Okay, next question. Any more questions out there? Going. Carl, thank you so much for a great program tonight.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for coming out on such a wonderful spring evening here in Lawrence, Kansas, and thanks and congratulations to all the Hemingway, to Allison and the runners-up. You guys are great. What great interviews. Thanks to all of you, and join us for our last program next Wednesday afternoon. Thank you.